So I'm gonna be covering the resource management portion of um, our Spectrum Pulse this evening on for part two of component therapy, and we're just gonna be looking at resource management sort of from a high level view, just to get you familiar with the concept of what resource management is, because I think a lot of people sort of get the gist of it, but are much more familiar with the engineering gameplay portion on how are they going to be working with resource management on their ships. And there's actually a lot more to that, and so that's what I'm going to be looking at, and then we'll transition from that portion into Naz's notes on how engineering gameplay actually works. And so we have a couple of timestamps from different videos queued up. So we're going to watch a few sections and talk about a few of the quotes that they talk about in order to give you a better understanding of what all this means, because resource management has been a huge priority for CIG for going on a couple of years now, in order to make it a big refactor of what used to be the components and pipe system, and to greatly expand it and unify that across the entire game for more than just ships. And I think that's the part that a lot of people miss, and why this is so impactful, and why it's really exciting to see their work on the progress tracker, and read the updates in the monthly reports regarding that work and how far it's coming along, because they are making really good progress. And if you didn't read the letters from the letter from the chairman, obviously the timelines are off on that, from the first letter, but they're not so far off that whether we'll see resource management in its in engineering gameplay in its first iterations this year, I don't know, but it's one of those things where it was planned for this year. They're working really hard on it. They're making good progress. I don't know if it'll make it into whatever the Q4 patch ends up being, but I do think that that we will see it in the first half of next year, if not sooner. And I think we're going to see it in a bigger way than people realize, based off of the way things are written in the monthly reports, and what they've been talking about. Not just the hammerhead, not just the whole A. I think the way that they're building it, it's going to be, and the way that they're describing the deliverables, we're going to see more to it than what was initially led on earlier on when people were talking about it. So let's go ahead and transition to the other screen. And I want to wait for Nazeris to get back, so that way he's up to speed on the conversation and he can offer in his insights as well. The first thing that we're going to watch is about 2 minutes of this ISC. It's called Interface Showcase, and it's from October 29th, 2020. And this is the one where we first saw the prototype of the resource management system overlaid on the hammerhead. But they're also, everybody got wowed by the prototype, but people missed a lot of the little quotes and the descriptions of the system that give us good context. And so, Nazeris is back. All right.
I'm back.
So we're going to watch, we're starting off with resource management. We're going to watch this first couple minutes from Interface Showcase, October 29th, 2020. So everybody listen carefully. I have, unfortunately, closed caption is not up, but otherwise, I will watch a video, and then I'll watch it again with closed caption on, and then I'll watch it a third time, generally, just to make sure I don't miss things.
The purpose of prototyping, especially for anything gameplay related, is to prove that it's fun. If you don't have it fun with a cube and a sphere, you can put all the pretty paint on top of it. It's never going to be fun. So with the resource management, we have this idea that there is one way the resources are managed throughout the entire game. There's one way to consume them, one way to produce them, and all the items everywhere, they use the same system. So we started by creating this small example of a ship where we have a power plant, we have a fuel tank, a battery, we have lights inside the ship, we have turrets, we have weapons. We try to build a priority system, so you never want your lights to have the same priority as, for example, your power plant or your weapons. Basically, as soon as we start the simulation, the power plant goes, I'm online now, but I have no fuel. So all of this energy right now, the lights start draining the battery. If we put some fuel in the fuel tank, as soon as we put it in, the power plant starts going online, the battery starts replenishing because there's not that many consumers online. If I go, okay, let's say I set my weapons, my laser weapons to fire, as soon as I do that, there will be more drain on the energy. We can actually see we have a simulation of resources. We know we're producing this much power and we're requesting this much. We're running everything through exactly the same system. Now, same thing, let's say someone takes out our power plant because it got shut down or got sabotaged. Automatically now we're on battery power. It might go, okay, we don't need weapons now, we're going to turn them off. Lights, I only need the one in the front, so I'm conserving a bit of battery power until I can repair my power plant. Once I repair my power plant, this goes online and I can start turning stuff on again. And this was our first thing we did, where we built the ship, and we built this tool in a way that allows us to build different ship configurations. So as you can see, you can kind of understand the basic.
So I think probably everybody has seen this ISC, and if you haven't because you're new to the verse, I highly recommend watching it. And the link is going to be in the show notes along with the timestamps, because this part is the second half of that ISC. But it's really illuminating on what they're building with the first prototypes and how they're working at it. And everybody saw this part because it's the pretty picture, but everybody missed the part that was going on over here, because this part over here is how when Naz gets into engineering gameplay, this part over here where he's talking about priorities and everything, they're already building that into the simulation, and so that way it's already there, and then they just put the skin on for the UI for us to use it in order to make our own priorities. So they're already thinking about this way ahead of time, but everybody saw this. But this also is a really good demonstration of the other aspects of engineering gameplay that Naz is going to talk about, or at least the initial prototype that they're working on for it. This is actually expanded on. But the other things that I wanted to talk about is the quote towards the beginning. It says, one way that what we wanted to build was one way that resources are managed throughout the entire game. One way to consume them, one way to produce them, and all items use the same system. It's a one ring system. And everybody's like, okay, cool, sweet. Every ship's going to work off the same resource management system. It's not just every ship, though. It's ships. It's all vehicles. It's outposts. It's cities. It's stations. It's everything. He mentions that in this video, and no one else clued in on that. Everybody was just like, sweet, engineering gameplay, yay, this is going to be so cool. Nobody thought about the ramifications for this, and then the timing for it. They've been working on this system at this point for a year in fall of 2020. Well, what did they show us in fall of 2019? That's the first time we got the quantum demo. And a year after we get the quantum demo, they're telling us that they're building a resource management system that's going to be the foundation for everything that produces and consumes resources. Just like in quantum, when you see the mines producing resources and the refineries taking those resources and refining them and producing something else to then be shipped off to somewhere else in order to make a power plant or a cooler, what have you. This is what I call the micro, the micro version, the microcosm of resource management. The macrocosm, the big version, is what you see in the quantum demonstration. And so we're going to take a look at that, and I hope that this will make more sense. But I really like the prototype because it demonstrates if you if you play Colony Sims, if you play Factorio, you are familiar with how these things work. This is basically just a colony sim under the hood of your spaceship, or under the hood of the quantum universe simulation, in order to make it so that way it takes this device, whatever it is, requires this many this much resource over this many turns to produce this output. And that resource can be fuel, it can be materials, it can be labor, anything, whatever they set the recipe as, and the tick rate in order to produce that is what will affect the output. And whether that output is power for your lights or your weapons, whether that output is life support, the atmosphere, whether that output is gravity. That's why you can have half gravity and full gravity and no gravity, based off of what the output is and how much resources you have. These if it's a refinery, that refinery will need raw materials. It will also need power. It will also have its own components for coolant. It will also need labor. And so you can have all those resources, but if you don't have quanta at that refinery doing the labor, it won't refine things and produce the output, which is refined materials, which is why if you go to refine materials at a refinery right now in game, that output is not static. It changes because it requires a certain amount of quanta to do that labor, and that's what affects the output of a refinery. It's what affects the output of a power plant factory on ArcCore, and all of these things. It's just part of a recipe system. So I forgot to queue up this video, but I have the timestamp correctly. So we're gonna watch a couple minutes of the building the 2949 CitizenCon building a dynamic universe video. So watch the first 2 minutes, and then I've got another part timestamp that I wanted to show you in order for it to make more sense.
What we actually want is a dynamic, logical universe. We want the demand for goods and services to be the result of a legitimate economic need, and we must have sufficient runtime context so that we can customize these modular mission templates. NPCs must be able to contribute in helping to turn the gears of the economy, from buying and selling goods to creating and accepting missions. The system needs to automatically balance itself so that we can focus on the high-level rules instead of the details. All of this, too, has to be incredibly computationally efficient, which means we need a more focused simulation engine, one that's only concerned with what we need to achieve the desired effect. If we're ever going to reach a point where we can deliver new solar systems in a reasonable amount of time, then we're going to need to make a quantum leap. So, what's the solution?
And this sentence right here up on the screen, it says complete knowledge of all game state. Celestial body positions, and there's actually a whole lot more. But so the quantum is hooked into all the services, and so quantum is what will, as far as the simulation goes, like if you play RimWorld, quantum is what manages, quantum along with the traits and the archetypes is what will define where the quanta go to do their labor and what labor they do, and whether they're hauling goods back and forth, because that's if you play RimWorld, that's one of the things that you can have your little colonists do, is they can specialize based on their archetypes and their traits. As you're leaning too close to the mic, I can hear myself. Sorry. But that's one of the things. If another good example is Stranded New Dawn is a great colony sim, and one of the traits is people can be good at just picking up and moving things to where they need to be stored, or where they need to be in order to, for someone else who's good at doing that work at that production node to do them. And so you're going to see that here, and it's the next clip starts at, let's see, minute 30. So Actually, here, let's start a little bit earlier.
You on the wrong one?
Yeah, that's fine.
So, you know, Jake here is cranking the number of quanta up to 1,000, and they're basically going to come streaming in from another system.
Flowing into the universe there.
These are simulated entities. The real significance of this is when you're talking about working out the vast multitude of details that we really need to allow this universe to evolve and feel dynamic, we don't actually need all of the incredibly high fidelity, super computationally expensive stuff that we would get if we were actually simulating these NPCs the traditional way on the server so that they look exactly like they would when you see them. These NPCs don't need to do animations. They don't need to do physics. They don't need to do collision detection. They don't need to do a whole slew of things that we couldn't afford to do. It'd be incredibly expensive to try. And in the end, even if we did it, it wouldn't make the end results any more accurate. So
They also have personality traits too. Like each
Yep.
one has a little bit of something going on.
yeah, there are a number of different traits.
So if you saw all of the little quanta going to the different locations, they're going to those locations because those are places where they can do work based off of their archetype. So there are factories on Crusader and on ArcCore and on Hurston. You know, they went to the different mines where they're on the moons. You know, they're small mines, so they only took so much labor. But you could see where, you know, the majority of the quanta are going to these places to do that labor based off their archetype and their traits, and also based off of available jobs. And there's, you know, so many available jobs and so much available, you know, and also housing. They simulate housing. So quanta you'll see them move around based off of those traits and those archetypes. And that's, you know, you'll see more of that based off of the work that's getting done. So let's fast forward to right here. So now they're going to add resources in.
Going to add a little bit of interest to the system by adding an aluminum mine to Delamar.
Part of the ship. Part of the crew. Part of the ship. Part of the crew. Part of the ship. Part of the crew. Part of the ship.
Now injected a mine onto Delamar, and yet you see the quanta still refuse to do anything. And that's because there's no economic reason for them to do it. There's nothing to do with the ore that they could go and extract. Let's go ahead and open up that card, though. So that card represents the mine on Delamar, and you can see a couple of stats towards the top, quantity and purity. And what these are is basically telling you how much of that material is in that mine, and purity is to some degree a measure of concentration. It effectively details how easy it is to extract it. There are a couple of parameters at the bottom that are temporary. Those will eventually be derived from those top two parameters, but for right now we can override it for some of the testing that we've been doing. So let's go ahead and jump to the next.
And so it's not visible on there right now, but the extraction cost and extraction time a cost is basically how much labor and it takes in order to extract a certain amount. And so, you know, it takes one person 60 ticks to extract a certain amount. Well, if you have two people and 60 ticks, it'll scale up from there. But that's how resource management works. In order to produce resources, because production isn't just the power plant making power. It's quanta being at a resource node to produce a resource that, you know, creates an output for you to then go pick up in your whole A and take to a refinery.
But for right now, we can override it for some of the testing that we've been doing. So let's go ahead and jump to the next. So now we're going to go ahead and add an aluminum refinery to Crusader.
We're going to watch about
and
6 more minutes of this.
You will see the quanta start springing to life. And what's happening is they've all figured out
and you see that, okay, there's a mine on Delmar producing aluminum, and there's people now going from these different planets to go pick it up and take it to a refinery. But you can see, obviously this isn't the 1,000 quanta that just came in. Well, it's because not every quanta has the archetype to be a hauler. These are the hauler archetypes to do the labor of hauling, goods from one place to another. And there'll be more, but based off of availability.
That refinery, it wants to build up a stockpile of aluminum, and in order to do that, it needs some raw aluminum ore, and thus it's willing to pay for it. And so the Quanta are seizing upon that economic opportunity, heading out to Delamar, doing the work, extracting that ore, and taking it back to the refinery. And this will continue until it's full. So let's go.
And an interesting thing is, you couldn't be able to see that detail, but he tells you that if a quanta has a little circle around it, it means that they are carrying goods. And so what you now know is that because there's a mine here now to produce goods, some of those quanta that went streaming over there went over there to haul goods, and some of them went there and stayed there to then mine the goods based off of their archetype.
Go ahead and open that card up again, and we can watch the refined aluminum ore gradually build up. You can also see the number of workers. A few of the quanta, so you see many of them actually acting as miners. There's also a number of them that are working in that refining factory. Refineries can't process this material, without labor, and there's a formula that dictates how much labor is required in order to process this stuff. And so they have to hire a sufficient number of workers in order to actually execute this operation.
So that's him just describing what I was just talked about. But he talked about there's quanta heading to Delamar to go operate that mine. So like if you think about it, you are going to this mine to pick up raw agresium. And that's being produced at a mine at a certain amount of ticks, a certain rate per minute per hour or whatever. You're not going to mine a rock. It's one of those outposts. That's a mining outpost. Well, if you think about that, there are workers. You can't. You'd only be able to see so many of them walking around and doing stuff, but there'd be more quanta in the background doing the labor. It's the same thing for the refineries. It's the same thing for the factories. Each one of those resource production nodes requires labor to produce the resource that it makes. But these resource nodes will also, some are going to be physicalized and some aren't. The ones that are physicalized, those things are not only have this macro resource management system with producing the output resource, but also requiring labor. But then those locations will also have what's that noise?
Which noise?
Oh, I think it's your fan activating the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But and that might be why I'm coming through. But what they talked about, I think it was in the Q&A, they talked about not all production nodes are going to be physicalized. Like if you go to ArcCore, you're not going to be able to visit the 1,000 different factories for producing every different type of component there. But like the outposts on the moons that are for mining or for farming that are producing a resource, those are going to be physicalized, and those locations will have different components that need to function. And they talked about that when they were making. I couldn't find the clip, but they talked about that when they were making Orison, Naz, if you remember that, and they talked about it with stations as well, where you will have maintenance jobs to go and maintain different aspects on and around Orison. Well, you're going to have those jobs as well for all the stations, for the refineries, for the outposts that are producing things, in order to do the maintenance. And you'll be competing with those for those jobs with NPCs to do them. But it's going to be one of the opportunities, economic opportunities for you, in regards to like engineering and repair gameplay. So let's keep watching this for a few more minutes.
And so this would continue for quite a while. Let's go ahead and speed up the simulation a bit. And go ahead and keep watching the aluminum inventory that's finished, so they're now building up their raw ore to basically load up, and after that, the entire economy comes to a halt. The one refiner we've added has no more incentive to buy more. Its storage houses are already full, and therefore it's not willing to buy. Since it's not willing to buy, the quanta have nothing to do. So what we're going to do now is add a factory. But before we do that, let's head on over to the power plant formula. And you can see here that building a power plant, just like refining ore, requires something. It requires 10 workers working for a duration of 60 ticks. And it also, notably, requires 2 units of refined aluminum ore in order to produce 1 power plant.
It's got to be more complicated than that, I promise. So.
Yeah. Again, we're building up.
But you see how this is a recipe system, just like the recipe for power for your lasers is a recipe system. And, for your power plant and your components, in order for, even your laser repeater is a production node, because it produces the lasers at a certain rate of fire based off of how much power it's receiving and how much coolant it receives. If it doesn't receive enough coolant, it will overheat, and therefore its production rate goes down. If it's not receiving enough power, it also won't produce as many lasers. The refinery talked about its stockpile. Well, the stockpile for the refinery of refined aluminum is no different than the stockpile within your capacitors for your lasers. It's same system. It's just the things that are production and consumption are named differently, and the recipe system has different inputs and outputs, but it's all built on the same system. That's why in the previous video, the way they talked about that, how this is essentially the one system, the one ring system to rule them all. It's so they don't have to build multiple bespoke architectures for these things to run on. It's just one architecture, and that way everybody who works on the game is familiar with it, and it's much easier to build and maintain and scale up without having to create a bespoke engineering system for ships and vehicles, a bespoke system for resource nodes like mines and refineries. No, it's all the same system. It's just a recipe system like is used in any colony sim, and it all just works under the hood.
So let's go ahead and add the factory to Hurston. You gotta slow down.
All going too fast there. Slow on down.
And you can see
so
some of these quantum are carrying cargo.
Spring to life. And so now you've
some
actually
aren't.
got 2 different tiers going. The factory. Let's go ahead and open up the factory.
They're moving around to do labor based off available jobs and their archetypes.
In order to build these power plants. It also needs refined aluminum. So now you've got multiple things going on. The factory is willing to buy refined aluminum. Someone has to transport that aluminum from Crusader to Hurston. So some of the quanta are basically working, they're basically working as freighters to move that, to move that product from one location to another. Some of them were working at the factory on Hurston. Some of them were working at the refinery on Crusader. Some of them are heading back to Delamar to actually do more mining. So you've got an entire little, economic cycle going here. However, it's going to wind up coming to a dead end here. Let's go ahead and accelerate it again, just like what we saw before, because eventually the factory fills up all of its warehouses. It can't take any more. It therefore has no more, it has no more need for refined aluminum. That will eventually shut down the refinery, which will in turn eventually kill off the miners. And you can see there that the inventory is still building on the aluminum, which is why there's still some activity.
There's a lot. But as soon as it's done, it starts flatlining, so you see that the inventory is capped out.
Yep, and now they're almost done. The factory is basically got, it's got all it can handle. The refinery has all of its, all it can handle. Therefore, the entire loop, draws to close again. So let's add one more node. Let's add a shop that sells power plants to ArcCorp. slow it down again. And so now the loop is a bit more complicated. The shop is looking, it's a retail shop, it's looking to sell power plants. In order to do that, it needs to be able to buy them for one price, sell them for another. So it adds its markup on, and it, just like the factory that requires transport of the refined aluminum from Crusader to Hurston, it needs the power plants transported from the factory to it. And so if you notice, if the individual quanta, they'll actually have a little translucent circle around them if they're carrying goods. And so you can easily differentiate whether or not the ones that are moving, for example, from Hurston back to the mine are empty. They're going to load up on ore. And then when they're heading back to Delamar, and then from Delamar back to Crusader, they've actually all got ore. And so this loop will actually continue indefinitely. And the reason is because we've cheated something for tonight, and it sounds very similar to what I was basically saying was a bad idea earlier, which is the shop right now is a simple consumer. It's burning off that inventory. The difference here is that the solution to that is very simple in the context of quantum. And the reason is these quanta, the next step of what we'll be working on is they'll actually require ships. Ships require engines. And so all of a sudden there's a real demand for how many power plants do you need? How many ships do you need? It all follows those same logical equations. So let's go ahead and add a bit more economic complexity.
Actually, it's not.
I'm going to skip ahead to this image.
All right, and before you play, like that gets going really fast. Like when you think of a ship and all the components that we are putting on it as players, all the components on it, they don't sell in like super large quantities, but they're really sporadic in which ones you buy at which times. So if you have a power plant, a cooler, a shield generator, just one of each, they flicker off as at very different rates. And so you'll end up with very organic kind of ebb and flow in the economy. Just in a little demonstration they showed up, like it snowballs really quickly.
Yeah, well, and especially and it's not just us. That demand is going to be based off of NPCs, and they're going to have their own little life cycles and get into accidents and get pirated and change jobs. But I thought that this image right here, with these lines crossing in between them in order to show the connections, was a good way of visually demonstrating. If you remember how the Hammerhead prototype was laid out with all the relay lines showing resources going from one place to another, very similar. And here's the fuel tank, which provides fuel to the power plant, and the power plant provides power to the capacitor, which provides ammo to the laser, and or to the shields. And then the power plant also provides power to the coolers, which circulate coolant to the different items in order to keep them cool, so that way they don't overheat, so that way they can continue to function. And all these things are interrelated, because it's an ecosystem, and each one of these things has a recipe in order to produce what its output is. And depending, the really cool part, really interesting part, that Naz is going to get into with engineering, is how you get to choose when, what that recipe looks like, and whether that recipe is being enacted on. That's the part that's really interesting to me, and very Star Trek-ish. That's the part that's fun to me, and it's also not mandatory. You don't have to do any of this. A lot of these people are like, oh, that's too sim for me, I don't want to do that. You don't have to. The ship will still run. This is just how you get the most bang for your buck, and not just your ship. You can do this for your outpost eventually as well. So let's get further into that. So let's watch the first couple minutes. This is the Power Play Journey to 4.0 from CitizenCon last year. And we're going to watch the first, first 4 minutes of this. And there's a couple of quotes that I want to share with you as we watch it, that really should hit home and drive this concept to you.
Hi, my name is Dan Truffin. I'm Assistant Director for PU Content.
I love Dan. He's one of my favorite devs.
Here today, we will be talking to you about something we think it will change the way Star Citizen functions and works and how the players will play the game in the future, and that is resource management. Resource management is the underlying system that allows items to produce, consume, and store resources.
Store resources in the game. What did we just watch on the quantum simulation? You watched an item, which is a mine or a refinery or a factory, produce and consume and store resources. But instead of it being power or coolant, it was aluminum. It was raw aluminum. It was refined aluminum. It was power plants. All of that. Same thing. Same system.
Is in the game. It is the digital representation of real-life cables, pipes, tanks, batteries, or anything like this that you can imagine.
It's the foundation of the ships, where you have certain resources like fuel and energy powering certain items on the ship, but it's also the system that will lie below any station or any vehicle, anything that you can imagine in our universe that actually requires a certain type of resource.
Resource management is not just a system that helps ships function. It is a thing that's integral to the functionality of the entire universe. It will be the way surface outposts function, underground facilities, space stations, landing zones. Everything in Star Citizen will function using resource management.
So we will
see. I'm not crazy. Everything you just showed, they just showed you on Quanta, is driven by the resource management system. The resource management system is what will tell those things what they need, what their needs are, in order to produce what they produce, and that the resource management is the recipe system that Quanta operates off of, and those two systems are integral to each other. For the economy to work, for things to be produced, and consumed in game. That's the macro scale. The micro scale is what goes on in our ships, and even what goes on in your outposts.
Start with the smaller vehicles, and the gameplay for those smaller vehicles way more interesting than what we have right now. And from that, we can move on to bigger ships, and finally the capital ships will have a real purpose in the world, and where it will have a real meaning that you have the multiple roles inside those ships.
It will.
And he talked about we're going to start with the smaller ships. Well, one of the first ships that they have planned, that they got started working on it, was the Hull A. And initially when they were telling us about it, they were telling us about it like they were going to introduce it with the Hull A soon. And I think the reason we haven't seen it soon is because they don't want to introduce the system piecemeal and have some ships have it and some ships don't. Because this is an under the hood system that that a lot of it isn't physicalized. The part that's physicalized is the components that you can remove and everything, but they can build what you saw on the Hammerhead and put that into the game, and it can function even without the physicalized components being there. They can fake those components being behind the hatches for you, but I think that they're going to continue to iterate on this. But they talked about how they were building it for the Hull A, and then the Ares and a few other ships along, as well as what they've been doing with the Hammerhead and that demo. And so this work is continuing. And so I think that we're probably going to be seeing it in ships sooner rather than later, and in a much more complete state, rather than just, oh, these are the first 4 prototype ships. I don't think they want to introduce this piecemeal and have some ships have a performance edge over another.
Yeah, drastically increase the time to kill for all.
Sorry, what'd you say?
I imagine every ship they touch, since the Hull A is going to have it. So the 600i, the Hull C, every ship they put in, the Freelancer's currently getting an update. So the Pisces got an update when the C8R came out. So as they touch on every little ship, they'll add all the things to get them up to their current needs of tech, and it will save them a lot of, oh, this ship is entirely useless now. We have to go and spend the next 6 months doing the gold standard pass. If we just piecemeal the updates onto them, we don't have to do such a big update.
Bug fixing and tech debt.
What?
Yeah. This is another really interesting part. Is
it will drastically increase the time to kill for all vehicles in Star Citizen, and it will encourage people to disable ships rather than destroy them. Missions like Siege of Horizon will increase in scope and scale up a lot more with the use of resource management, as players will be able to cripple resources, change the way resources are distributed, cut power, cut certain fuel and critical parts in order to progress further in those missions.
We can suddenly scale a lot.
Yeah, so not only is it just for the economic aspects of the game, but even just for missions. And lawful and unlawful missions are going to involve resource management and how you interact with these components, and not just components on ships, like they've been saying, at locations. You know, obviously, if it's a non-physicalized location like the ethereal power plant factory on ArcCore, you know, you won't be able to necessarily interact with that. But these physical locations like Orson, like the outposts and the underground facilities, like the stations, that prototype that they showed you for those locations will be physicalized, and there will be places where you can interact with the different components that are part of that resource management system for that location. You can do it as part of... Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Now, I wonder, and this is completely theoretical because of what the implications of changing power distribution on a Orison platform, are they going to give you a pass to get into these restricted areas, and can you not relinquish that pass after you leave, therefore being able to go somewhere else and use it nefariously?
I don't want to know what Blizzrad would do
Engines
with
what?
such power. Didn't we? CIG will just log into their monitoring system in their network operations center and be like, wait a minute, didn't we have more islands, platforms on Orison? Where did they all go? Hold on, rewind. Who's this Blizzrad guy? What is he doing? Oh God, what has he done? Yeah.
Orison is now gone.
Well, that's the other interesting part, is it's going to, drastically increase the time to kill on all ships, and that's going to scale even more. And so, whatever I did was perfectly legal, just awful. But that's the other really interesting part, is instead of just trying to kill a ship, because getting it to blow up will require so much more time and effort, you're going to be encouraged to disable it and to look for those weak points. And that even though it's not going to increase it as drastically on a fighter versus an Idris, it's going to increase it long enough, along with the master mode system, where combat is slowing down, where these dogfights are going to last longer, and you're going to want to, you're going to have the opportunity to disable ships, and you're going to want to do so, but it's also going to give people the opportunity to run away from combat, rather than just, oh, someone got a lucky shot in and we've only been fighting for 30 seconds and then I just went boom. So it's going to make combat a lot more interesting and dynamic.
And something they talked about last time they mentioned damage was the exploding is actually going to be a result of something happening, not just you hitting the ship.
Yeah.
It's going to be you have to force a cascade to achieve an explosion. Otherwise, you are just going to say, just putting holes in a ship does not blow it up. You have to make a cascade event happen for an explosion to happen. So for those reefers mostly that are just looking to blow stuff up, they'll be sorely disappointed because it's just going to disable the ship. And after it's disabled, you can't then force a cascade, because now stuff is shutting down, stuff's going into a sleep mode, and the pilot can just say, okay, all systems off, I need repairs. So And so that explosion effect will not happen nearly as much after the system rolls in because it requires that cascade.
This is why boarding actions are such a big deal in Star Citizen, because things will
Somebody
be
made
disabled.
a video about that.
It's almost like I made a video about that because Naz and I have been talking about this very thing for like 2 years now.
A lot bigger than what we have right now. And the reasons are that we have more control over the powers of certain platforms there, and we can introduce some interesting gameplay that facilitates these functionalities.
Resource management is going to open up the possibility of player structures, player-owned outposts on planet or stations in space, where the player will have to manage resources, bring in fuel,
So this was another really interesting part, because we've always known that we were going to be able to build our own outpost homestead type things. But the Rastar demo at this last CitizenCon is where they first mentioned, or was it the Rastar update just after CitizenCon? I forget which. Is where they mentioned that we'll be able to use Rastar to build things in orbit. And so the outposts and homesteads that we will build with the Rastar system will have their own resource management systems. But if we'll be able to use Rastar to build things in orbit, they have always said we won't have player-controlled stations. And so I don't think we're going to have player-controlled massive stations like we do, like the ones in Stanton right now. But I do think that we will be able to have smaller outposts and space-based outposts that we can build and own and operate. Obviously not on a large scale, but similar scale to what we would build down on a planet. And that's something that really excites me because of where you could build those things and what their function would be. And with this system, they can basically create it to have any sort of function, in conjunction with the Rastar system. So that's really cool to me. But that's, this sentence right here,
where the player will have to manage resources, bring in fuel, do repairs. And this will not be something that only caters towards the engineer. This will be something that is valuable for everyone in the world of Star Citizen.
Resource management.
It's important to everybody. And, it's just like you don't have to be an engineer on your ship. It's not forcing you to engage in engineering gameplay on your ship, but it's how you can... obviously you'll have to, bring in fuel and, occasionally replace components and stuff. But you don't have to tune your own components at your outpost. But if you are, have an outpost over a resource node, and maybe you want to produce more minables over a certain period, or, refine faster, or maybe you have a research outpost and you want to be able to do more quantum calculations or something, and you want to optimize that, you'll be able to optimize that just like you can do it on your ship via engineering type gameplay.
Management will finally allow players to build their own bases and their own homesteads and actually keep that loop engaging and fun.
And really, this is the main thing that makes multi-crew gameplay possible. We envision...
I think the other thing that's really important is a lot of people have thought of outposts as just I want to have my own space house to decorate and store my stuff. But this takes the outposts and homesteads and makes them so much more than just your space house, like you've had in other games. A location to store your items, where your vault is, and your collection of little things that you've kept, your pet that you go back and you pet every now and then. It makes it a much more usable and interesting location that is much more customizable for you, just like your ship.
The players taking on roles like engineer, mechanic, tactical officer. And while you have your engineer trying to maintain all the resources functioning and flowing perfectly,
you're doing a great job.
Good operation, you will have mechanics running throughout the ship, trying to change fuses, repair various things that have broken down. You will have tactical officers moving shields from one side of the ship to another in order to counter whatever incoming damage you have. Obviously, the pilot is going to be doing his job, trying to move the ship out of harm's way. The gunners are going to be taking out enemy incoming fighters or other ships. This is how we envision this entire ecosystem just coming together and providing what we hope is true multi-crew gameplay. And for all of you out there that are waiting for the Idrises and Javelins and want to use these ships, this is the system that is going to make using those ships possible. So all that said, this is a really important system for Star Citizen, but let's dig into the details and see what exactly this is. Resource management can be broken down into several key elements: power, energy, resources, life support, item maintenance, relay handling, access control, and gravity. So let's...
All right, so we're not going to get too much into that because that's going to be Naz's purview, but we're going to watch a couple more things just because I wanted to highlight how resource management, we talked about how resource management feeds into quantum and what the needs of quantum are, because we've talked, Naz and I have talked about this. The quantum system generates contracts. It isn't just it. When you don't think about dynamic pricing, because that isn't what it's for. It's when a refinery wants more raw aluminum, they order it from the mine, and then that creates a contract for someone to go and haul it, pick it up from the mine and bring it to them. When that refined aluminum is produced and then it needs to go over to the factory that wants it to build something, that factory buys it and it creates an order for somebody to go and pick that up and bring that here. We will pay you this much money to do it. That's how quantum works. If you watch the rest of that presentation and the one that comes after that from 2021, mentions contracts multiple times, and that's the part that people just gloss right over. They think it's dynamic pricing for commodity buying and selling, and it's like, no, it's meant to create contracts for the movement of goods and the creation of the need for services. But the other aspect of the resource management that I wanted to highlight, because we just talked about how it's going to allow for outposts and base building, is I wanted to show you a couple little clips about what we've seen from the production of these outposts, and then I'll show you some images. So first, we'll look at the early white box imagery and concepts in order to just see that they've been thinking about this from the get-go with the production of these outposts. It isn't these outposts are going to have to be refactored after they're in game to account for this. No, they've already been planning for this. So here is the exploration work in progress for the some of the exterior modules, and if you remember from the 2951 CitizenCon, where they had these solar panels and these like antenna relays on top of the outpost that they hopped up onto there. Not Sean Tracy. Eyes guy, who
Eyes guy? Oh,
yeah. Has the dreamy
now that
eyes.
you say that, yeah.
He talked about it in the mission. You'll be able to disable the solar panels or affect the comms relays in order to impact the mission, or to take jobs to repair those things. He said that during the demonstration. Here those things are. But you can see in the descriptions in these images, the communications tower, your warehouse for where goods would be stored, your gas and liquid storage units, another warehouse, because the cargo is going to be physicalized. That's why that door is right there. When you transport cargo in a liquid container, or a gas container or whatever, it's going to end up in these things, and this is the physical representation, that X amount of SCU of unrefined or refined gas is stored here in order to, be used in the production of whatever. You've got thermal cooling. Here are your coolers, just like you have on your ship. So if you need thermal cooling for whatever production facility you've got going on, that's how it works. Your farms. In order to produce food, you're going to have so much labor working at these farms over a period of time. You're going to have water brought in the facility or you know, a functioning water purifier. You know, again, more liquid and gas storage. More storage, geothermal power plants. Those things aren't going to run by themselves into perpetuity. You're going to have to manage those and make sure that they're functioning appropriately in order for your outpost to have power. If you don't have power. And if you're on a planet with no atmosphere, there goes your life support, just like on a ship. Just some more examples of these things. I think it would be really cool if, you know, it says communication and research tower. You know, this could be doing scans, you know, related to science and research gameplay, which Naz has talked about in a scanner anomaly before. You know, but this is going to require cooling. It's going to require power. You're going to have to replace components on this thing. More solar and wind power generators, all this sort of stuff. And this is just the, you know, 3D explorations of this sort of stuff. You know, more storage. Underground data banks.
We've seen a close up of those somewhere.
Yeah, there is more images of these close up, and when you look at the close ups, you can see where they have modeled in where you would interact with the data bank. So, storing data, hacking data transport, you know, with your different ships and vehicles or different jobs. And here's close-ups of different things that, you know, this is an item. Here's the interactable portions of it where you can affect its function, and how, you know, and affecting its function will affect the function of the, you know, the rest of the outpost that it's connected to. Here's how you can affect the function of the solar panel. Whatever the heck this little guy is. Maybe it's an air conditioning unit or a life support unit, you know, out here on the exterior, and you sabotage that, and all of a sudden you lose life support in here. That's just a door panel. I don't know why I had that one up. But then let's...
That's the garage.
Yeah. Well, it's a door panel in the garage, but obviously you can interact with it. But, oh, I picked up this one because, you know, whatever these are, you know, maybe those are batteries, you know, for backup power for your outpost. You know, if your power plant, if you don't have these in your design of your outpost, and then your power plant goes down, you're up a creek without a paddle. And so I've got a couple of just short clips to show you the updated progress on these. And one of them in particular is really interesting that I think you're going to like. So this was from March of 2022. These were all from 2020, I think, and 2020 going into 2021. This is 2022.
Finally, let's take another look at the continuing development of colonialism outposts, including these new liquid storage tanks, some new light fixtures, wells,
Geothermal.
and new garden modules. You know it's the future because of hexagons. Then,
so you saw the wells, you know, that could be a water well where you have water storage for your farm, and the recipe system for your farm in order to produce, you know, the produce that you make for food or whatever, or drugs. You know, maybe you're just growing drugs. You know, your recipe system could require ticks of labor from either you or NPCs, as well as water, and, you know, maybe you have to have, you know, supplies of fertilizer or something. I don't know. You know, it could be a very simple recipe system, but if you run out of water because your water shipment was, you know, destroyed, you know, in orbit, you know, there goes your production of your food supply. You know, so it's when they talked about managing your resources, you know, resource management, you know, water on these locations, depending on what you're doing, you know, that's a resource, and you know, having the appropriate water storage for your space farm obviously is going to be a big deal. But they, you know, show those liquid storage tanks, you know, you're storing liquids or gas because you have a fuel refinery on the planet, and people are bringing you fuel gas in order to refine it into more efficient fuel. You know, and that's where you store the raw or the refined fuel that's coming to you. And that ties into this next clip. Oh, actually, I'm going to back it up because I thought this was really cool.
And just so you don't think they've only been working on the same stuff from last year, here's a sneak peek at early...
Sorry, this is ISC Derelicts of Daymar, September 8th, 2022. So 6 months after the previous one.
White box of a repair and service station you may encounter on your travels in Stanton, Pyro, and beyond. Work is also underway
So a repair and service station. You'll be able to go there and refuel your ship, get it repaired. But that's a production node. In order to repair ships and refuel them, they need fuel. They need, RMC. They need components. And all that stuff is, in order to do a repair of this ship, we have to have X amount of resources. If we don't have them, we can't repair your ship. Resource management.
Creating various refineries and other producers that will make use of the upcoming resource management system to provide...
Right there. Refineries and other producers that will make use of the upcoming resource management system.
New opportunities for players to build their credit empire, or should they choose, hinder the advancement of someone else's. And finally...
And if you saw, let's see, these yellow things, basically it's this is like the component bay on your ship. You open up the component bay and you can interact with these components, either to sabotage it also, but if you're, replacing relays, replacing subcomponents, this is where all that happens. In order to manage your refinery at your outpost, just like you would manage your ship and the production of resources there. And I think, yep, that's all that I have for resource management. And Nazeris is going to talk about engineering gameplay and what that means for us. How does this all work? How do we interact with it?
Yes. Where is the word I'm looking for? I don't know. I'm looking for a thing to give you a timestamp, but I forgot the word they used for the person that does the tweaking of the ship as far as components go. What word did they use? They used it like 50 times.
Oh, in the design brief.
Yeah, there's mechanic, there's engineer, and then there's the other one that turns all the knobs.
Let's see if there's a...
Blah, 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 blah.
Here. Mechanic.
Oh, there it is.
Tuner.
Tuner, okay. And we are. Okay, copy it, current time, do that, there we go. There we go. Okay, so to start off, I wanted to get this timestamp in to set up the 3 different jobs within the engineering gameplay loop.
Oh, did you send me something?
Yes, sorry, on Discord, yes.
That you can wear as an engineer.
And whoops, that's not what I meant to do. What? Show transcript. And so it's 9:30.
Yeah, 9:33, yeah.
We'll start a little bit before. There we go.
You have several engineers on your ship, and for that we introduced the three types of hats that you can wear as an engineer. The three basic engineering types are tuner, mechanic, and manager. So the tuner is the person that is responsible for your strategic decisions. The tuner is responsible for setting up the items in advance depending on what you want to achieve with your ship. So if you want to go exploring, you ask the tuner to bring the items into a state that they are less prone to wear and tear, that they sustain longer, that they can or are more energy efficient or resource efficient. The tuner defines item groups, base resource consumptions, responsibilities or roles on your ship, as well as setting new min and max performances for all the ship items you have. So overall, the tuner is a very proactive role where we want to reward players who plan their crew activities in advance. We did plan the tuner to be more relevant in advance of your adventures, but I'm sure players will figure out ways to make use of the tuner in various scenarios. The next hat you wear as an engineer is the mechanic. The mechanic plays into your fantasy of...
Keep going.
Yeah. Stop at 12:33.
12:33.
What you imagine when you think about sci-fi and the role as an engineer. It's like, in Star Trek terms, the person running around or crawling through Jeffries tubes to fix any item. Or in Star Wars terms, Chewbacca handing you the Hydro Spanner to fix up the Millennium Falcon. You are responsible for fixing fuses, figuring out what the details of the malfunctions are. You are analyzing the situation on site. So you're going through all the rooms, finding the item that you were just called out on that needs maintenance, needs repair. Depending on the item or the situation, you as the mechanic have to react individually to it, which can be a minigame-like character where you have to fix something that is unique to the malfunction that you are facing. The manager uses the engineering screen to analyze your state of the ship, and they dispatch mechanics or the tuner where need arises, and can even assist with fixing certain malfunctions. They manage the resource consumption via the presets the tuner prepared or manually controlling the resource distribution, and they work together with the bridge crew to ensure a successful operation of your ship.
There you go.
You know what's really crazy about that? When it talks about the tuner. My wife's car has 4 modes. And so she has sport mode, she has smart mode, normal mode, and then off-road mode. And each one of those things, it basically is a preset that a tuner put into the car that affects how it performs. And I was like, oh my gosh, you know, somebody did engineering gameplay on my wife's car. Because like the sport mode, it like revs up earlier. You've got like lower end torque and horsepower. It accelerates faster, but it's also, you know, less fuel efficient, and, you know, you're more RPMs, more wear and tear. And the smart mode, lower RPMs, but it also does that thing where it turns off at stoplights and then turns back on, whereas normal mode doesn't do that.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good analogy too. So we have the 3 types: the tuner, the engineer, tuner, mechanic, and what was the other guy called? Manager, which is chief engineer. It's the chief engineer. I don't know why they're called it. I'm listening.
I'll be right back.
All right. So the tuner, like they said, is much more focused on the pre-launch, kind of making sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, so all your components are functioning in a way to get your future mission done. Much like most of the time we see Scotty in Star Trek, he's turning dials to get whatever system that they need to be overclocked. So let's say that you're in a Carrack, because that's the thing they like using, because it has lots of systems to, dial in. Let's say you're going to go to a particularly close to a star. That means you're going to want to turn off any unnecessary systems that aren't going to generate heat, weapons, and you're going to want to boost stuff like shields and coolers, so you're able to take more of the heat away from the components. So you're going to want to make sure you can take everything else down, and maybe even want to take some of the rooms down for life support. You're going to want to make sure your mechanics are standing by when your stuff starts to overheat, because you're going to overheat even though you're doing all this stuff. So that's where the manager comes in and says, okay, even though we have the tuners doing that, mechanics, I want you here, here, and here to make sure when we actually do catch on fire, you're there to fix it. And then obviously the mechanics will be there to do the actual maintenance on components, to fix them in slot, remove them, or replace them. So that is kind of how each of those break down. Now, there's not a whole lot. A lot was actually covered in the first one with how everything's going to work. But this is kind of like the breakdown of what each one is going to do. So I believe, and I think I also lost, the other spot, because it goes into a little bit of the mechanics job, and I really liked how they explained it. Where was it? Interesting. Because no, that's just fire. That's just fire.
Just fire.
Where did he put it? Oh, where is it?
I really like with this system, the possibilities are almost endless. Like you talked about the Carrack, if you're wanting to explore close to a star, get readings or whatever, that's a really good representation of it, of, hey, we need to give more juice to our shields while we're over here, but we don't need these other things. And you don't have to do engineering gameplay to fly your Carrack around, but if you want to do these certain things, you're going to need to do engineering gameplay.
And the bigger the ship, the more important it's going to be.
Yeah, or you're going to... If you don't do engineering gameplay, you're going to incur more risk for not doing it. Or if you're... I think another really good example is like the Terrapin. If you really optimize, with the design of the Terrapin and the way it, locks itself down in order to reduce its signature, you could really optimize that in order to really reduce your signature for a long period of time, in order to stay hidden. Or, when you're doing the scanning with it, you could shunt power to your scanner radar system in order to increase its range or the resolution, if you're able to shunt more power and cooling to it, based off of, we talked about subcomponents. If you've got the, different subcomponents, okay, well, I've already magnified this component this much with the subcomponent choices, and then by doing the gameplay like you talked about, you can take it even further. And that's the crazy thing to me is, okay, here's the base stats, but based off of your component and subcomponent choices, you can get it up to here, and then by your gameplay decisions and the way you play it, you can take it up to here and get you that much more performance, and in a way that's challenging and engaging. And it's not fun to everybody, and so so it isn't mandatory, but if you want to,
highly incentivized.
It's very incentivized.
So I sent you another timestamp for you. And this is more the kind of maintenance they're kind of thinking about from the get-go.
Something like you standing in front of the item and using your fire extinguisher to bring down the temperature of the item. And if it's too cold, you can use a flamethrower or blowtorch. So wear and tear is a danger you might have already heard us talk about in the past. It's just something that the longer your item runs, the less efficient it will be at some point. So a general maintenance will be required to keep them up and running. And then there is the new one, which we call malfunctions, which we'll talk about later in more detail. But the way that you react as the engineer there is unique to each malfunction.
So, components will have different properties that you have to maintain, even in their functional state, as wear and tear gets on them. One of them being heat. A component can get too hot, burst into flames, or just too hot in general. And the tuner would say, oh, I just need to shunt more of the coolant that way. The engineer would say, oh, I just need to use the cold gun on it or whatever. I need to go do something physical with it. The tuner is menus. And then on the other side, there's things too cold. Well, I could shunt more power, says the tuner, to heat it up, to rev the engines a bit. And the engineer just wants throw a flamethrower at it to heat up the component itself. So these two people on board a ship will always be kind of at odds and always kind of fighting because they have different ways of approaching the same problem. And as he started getting into, when it actually goes wrong, then there'll be things that you have to fix. And on smaller ships like an MSR, you're probably only going to have a single engineer that's going to do all three hats: the tuner, the mechanic, and the chief engineer. What is it called? Manager, chief engineer. It's chief engineer. And then something on a bigger ship, maybe a C2, a Kraken, Idris, so on and so forth, is going to need to diversify into specifically these people, because you're going to be doing, as a chief engineer, you're going to be looking at all the things that need to be done. Maybe you have X amount of items that need repairs or tweaks, and you can't just do them all yourself. I forget what that was in, but it was may have been Star Wars, where they were too busy doing all the tweaks themselves that they missed something bigger. So you're going to need a manager on board to make sure that that giant list of things that needs to get done is being prioritized properly, and they can see the bigger picture. And my brain just blanked on what the next sentence was.
You bring up a good point, though, with seeing the bigger picture, especially like you're in the interior of a ship and you don't know what's going on outside. And so your priorities of, I need to get this job done. Well, someone else who's watching the engineering overlay, is going to need to say, hey, that's not a priority right now. We need this fixed, or we need this tuned or changed. You're on deck 5. I need you on deck 3 forward section, to modify, this cooler, because it's the one that's, closest on the output to, these turrets or whatever.
And you had mentioned a good thing with redundancies and things. Depending on what you're trying to achieve, different redundancies would be shut off or turned on. So one of the things they said, I believe in the original or the second time they showed the resource screen, the resource management screens for the ships, the relays and stuff, the hammerhead kind of layout, they had mentioned that offline relays don't get damaged. So if your engineer says, we're about to take on a ton of damage, shut off every single relay possible so that we can negate that damage, and then once we're through that barrage, then we start turning systems back on. So you can have your battle ready, but then go down to your minimum system if you're about to take a brunt of damage, like maybe a solar flare.
Yeah, remember when the last video for IAE where they're in the Corsair headed back to Stanton, and they get hit by the flare? Had they been, and then they're just tumbling through space completely disabled because they probably didn't have, anything, any of the protection up, or any, have enough shielding. Maybe you could ride out that solar flare if you max power to shields, and turn off these relays to prevent them from being being damaged. The other thing to mention as part of the tuning is relays consume power. Just by having power going through them, it's almost if you think of it, kind of like a friction loss through pipes. And so by just having power going through them, they're consuming power. Well, if you're not if you don't need all your relays running to power your minimum items as you're traversing a system, you're like, oh, okay, I want my weapons charged, but I just need the minimum relays to have them, keep them charged, keep my shields going. I'll turn off these redundant systems. That way they're not only not incurring wear and tear, but they're not consuming excess power, which means you don't require as much power output, which means you consume less fuel. For all you whole C people out there, the whole C probably has a bunch of redundant systems. Imagine how much money you could save on fuel costs just by engaging in good engineering gameplay.
Or think of the Kraken.
Imagine
that's gonna take
the mileage
so much
that
fuel.
a Kraken gets.
I don't want to.
Yeah.
I have enough problems paying the fuel bill in my C2 or my 2 series. Like, no, that's $20K for like an hour of flight. It's terrible.
Yeah, you measure fuel costs in hours operated versus millions of kilometers traversed. Just because you kind of like a boat engine. It's this Kraken only has 3,000 hours on its capital sized power plants.
Yeah, and another thing is like replacements. So I don't remember where it was, and it would take me a minute to find it because it's just like a very slight clip where the engineer can take out a component and then go to the workbench and do some repairs on a specific component to get it to some level of functioning. So you then have a choice to make. Do you leave the dying component in to use it up and till it's completely used and broken? Do you take it out and repair it and put it back, or do you take it out and replace it with a new one? And that's going to lead more into keeping the ship stocked with extra components. And a lot of the time in a lot of the different ship manuals or the ship brochures, and when they talk about new ships, like, oh, sure, it has this much cargo space, but that's actually for internal stuff. Well, what is that internal stuff? Food for the crew, extra components, and extra resources for this system. And that's not only for ships, as we mentioned. I'm going to go a little bit ways back in the conversation and talk about outposts. Outposts is the same exact system, not even... That's the one. Yeah, that.
There's a reason I chose this image. This is Nazeris right here. You can't tell because of the helmet. But he's looking at this component, and he's like, what am I going to do with you? How are we going to get home?
There's a hammer somewhere on that desk. I'm just going to hit it and see if it works. Not
progressive maintenance.
There's also the repair thing right there next to him. I forget what it's called. There's a word on it. But there's this little like 3D printer-y thing, this oven next to him, that also is part of some gameplay for maybe a testing box, maybe a tuning box.
So if it bursts into flames, it doesn't hurt you because it's safe in here?
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
Makes sense to me.
So this whole system...
You can test your overclocks in here.
Exactly. So this whole system directly applies back to outposts. Everything that we just talked about for a ship applies to an outpost and to a station. It doesn't necessarily apply to landing zones, though they have a lot of the same landmarks. It will have power planets, it will have lights, it will have these things. But it's not you touching all these little knobs. But you can do it to a station, do it to these different places. So in outposts, you'll have, instead of components, you'll have structures. You'll have your warehouse, so that's your cargo hold. You'll have the solar panels, which give you power. You also have batteries. So these components turn into whole buildings. And then all these things are going to need maintenance as well. The reason I wanted to bring up Outposts again is because I have too many windows and I need to figure out where this window is. Where is it? No, it's not that one. There it is. For some reason, it's just not showing up. In the Hong Kong Bar Citizen, it was mentioned. The person who was there said it this way. However, there was a statement made in passing, wishing to see something big like the Pioneer come out this year. And the comment was made, you really should come to CitizenCon this year. I think you'd be happy. So speaking about bigger ships and or outposts, we have no idea what they were referencing specifically. However, we may be getting more information on bigger ships / outpost / resource management / engineering gameplay. Something around this sphere, specifically at CitizenCon. And the big thing about the CitizenCon is it seems kind of like the apex of a lot of different things. We've seen the roadmap. We went through it of where resource management is, where outposts are, and we've seen a lot of these different things. So this is not like a super far off thing. They have ships in the game that support it. And a lot of these things, I know we don't have a lot of the updates we need, as we talked about earlier, for the roadmap, because we're a bit backed up. Life support goes out to mid-November. Fire where is it? Fire extinguishers have been done a little while. There's another fire one. Wear and tear weapon misfire, which is part of wear and tear. Gets done in a couple days. Not done, but the bars end. Again, we don't have all the information. I'm just saying what it currently is at. Fire hazard has been done. Then hacking is another part of it. That's been done a little while, for about a month now. And then the resource management system, we looked at. It's somewhere down here. There it is. Goes out till the end of the fog of war. So we know that's going to be continued development into the next year. And Rastar, kind of sort of the same or related system that has been done, at least where they've, for this first release, since mid-June. Now, have I missed anything super big? Because I just want to make sure that I have most things covered. No, I'm not able to screen share right now. Interesting. Oh, and grab it to the next one. Grab. Artificial gravity also goes out till end of October. So those are all kind of facets of resource network and stuff that we're going to need in the game to properly turn on the engineering gameplay that we've been talking about for the past 2 hours or something.
Yeah, and they had those prototypes all in engine. So we watched the first couple minutes of this from CitizenCon last year, but the rest of it, talks. That's where I got this image from. But the rest of it talks, a bit about engineering gameplay. Not as in depth as the design brief video, but it also shows the in-engine, the in-engine demos and prototypes of, the gravity, the life support stuff. So, actually, here let's see. Let's find the right.
And in a slightly earlier ISC, there was the fire demos, in-engine demos, and we know that the 600i was already mocked up with it. So the fire system, for all intents and purposes, is complete. It just now needs to be propagated throughout all these ships with the resource management system, so we can have life support, or we need life support to again help with the fire suppression system. So lighting fires on ships and life support and engineering and resource management are all very much intertwined, and so it's hard to like find a piece for deserts. It's hard to find a piece of it to release early so that we can actually get content and test, because they're so intertwined. And this even goes like as far as Quanta, as far as UGS, as far as a lot of the systems they're working on. It's so intertwined. That's why a lot of this has been talked about as if it's one kind of thing with the series of the Journey to 4.0 kind of demos. They're all kind of like lumped into that same kind of goal as that 4.0 kind of demo. And so the game's going to go from 0 to 60 real fast.
Yeah. So all these clips right through here, you know, it just demonstrates removing atmosphere from a room, adding atmosphere to a room, you know, in order to suffocate people. It changes the temperature, and also in order to suffocate fire. But then this clip right here is my favorite, because it shows you a really good demonstration of some really interesting first-person gameplay elements. So look at all of this. Backed up a little bit. So you've got a whole bunch of graffiti. You've got a whole bunch of, you know, just if this looks familiar, it should look like the interiors for the space stations in Pyro.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's what makes this really interesting to me, because here we go. So gravity is on, normal jumps, low gravity, higher jumps like if you're on a moon, and then gravity off to go into EVA. So that
all the
really
same system.
Yeah, all in the same system, you know, and you can have that from just turning off the, you know, gravity generator itself, or from shutting off the relay between the gravity generator and its power source, shutting off the power, you know, the power source, you know, that supplies that, you know, however you want to go about doing it.
Too many things needing power at the same time,
Yeah.
so that might
And
bring
it's
the
lower
gravity
on the
generator.
priority.
Right, that may bring the gravity generator down to a lower state of function.
Yeah, I could say, you know, oh, we're not getting enough power now, so we can only give you half gravity or whatever, you know. And you can do that for a tactical advantage, but you could also do it like they talked about it with the Pyro space stations. There's all these different hidden areas to navigate, you know, that maybe you wouldn't be able to get to if you're, you know, just trying to mantle. But if you've got low gravity, you can jump up there and grab that ledge, or you can EVA up there to get what you're, you know, oh, there's a loot crate up there, or I need to get this way to get to that crawl space in order to sneak into an area to get something. You know, there's a lot of, you know, they've talked about this numerous times, but, you know, there you go. That's engineering gameplay. You're not engineering on a ship, but you're interacting with the resource management system as part of the gameplay systems. And so for people who are like, oh, I just want to shoot stuff, well, you don't want a tactical advantage. You don't want to be able to sneak around and get good loot. You know, this is a system that, like they talked about earlier, is for everybody, not just people who want to be engineers.
Yep. And the bigger the ship, the more necessary it becomes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and there's a line I thought was kind of redundant, but this is the kind of gameplay that they want in before big ships, because it gives, and this is just the 3 jobs part of it, but gives the big ships reasons to have multiple different jobs. So whereas we already have pretty good definitions of pilot, captain, and gunner. Well, here are 3 more jobs to add to a crew, and that's without having redundant jobs. So we also have, eventually, we're going to have cook or chef or food person. We're also going to have cleaning. So we're starting to get that kind of
your
amount
quartermaster,
of crew.
the person who manages everything that's in the cargo hold and what supplies you need. You know, because the like on a Navy ship, you know, say you're the engineer. You know, we could ask Nightcom about this, but you know, the engineer knows what resources the ship needs. Well, they don't go out and purchase those things. They don't manage the stockpile of them in the cargo hold. They communicate that to the quartermaster.
Oh, and medical officer and medical personnel. A really good definition of what you just said is actually in Firefly. When they dock at one of the cities, most of the other people stay on board. And Mal and Zoe go into town to get the stuff they need. And so they kind of are taking like requests from the rest of the crew. What does Simon need? What does Kaylee need to actually get their job done? And they say, well, it'd be really nice to have this, and this. So, and then they would go into town and get the stuff.
Well, we only have 1,000 credits, so we're only going to get this and this. You need
no strawberries this time.
Yeah, no strawberries. We can have canned tomatoes.
Potatoes.
Yep.
More spuds.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I still can't wait for them to actually start talking about. Is that supposed to be a thing? I didn't hear it.
Oh yeah, no. Victor played "Stop Blowing Holes in My Ship."
Ah, yes, that. They haven't talked about food like at all. Like at all. No cooking has been talked about. Like we have these like varying degrees of kitchen. Like the 890 has such a big kitchen. Talk about the gameplay.
I need you to shunt power to the kitchen so I can brew this pot of coffee faster.
But like and then we have also personnel transport.
Well, that's so the other thing that's really interesting is with resource management. We talked about how you'll need labor. So they in part 1 of component therapy, we showed a clip where they talked about the behaviors. They showed off the engineering behaviors for NPCs, and they talked about how these behaviors, you know, and are going to be part of archetypes, and so you'll be able to assign an NPC with engineering skill to be the engineer and I need you to be, you know, to replace the relays in this section of the ship or monitor the components and such. But that's part of the labor situation is you'll be able to hire NPCs to do maintenance on your ship or to do maintenance at your outpost and come work for you. But the NPC labor for
hiring
the
NPCs
refineries.
To work at your outpost? Where have I heard that recently?
Yeah. Or, you know, to the NPCs that work at the refinery stations, or the cargo decks, or the mines on the surface, you know, the mining outposts, or even the UGFs, because the UGFs are going to be production nodes. The NPCs to work there are going to need to be transported. How do you think we're going to get NPC transport missions? You know, part of that you're not always going to be transporting the rich and famous, you know, the Hurstons of the universe around in your E1. A lot of times you're going to be taking your your Genesis or maybe your Cutlass Steel or something like that, just to transport laborers around back and forth en masse.
Valk.
You know, yeah, that's essentially, you know, transporting laborers is your lower value cargo missions. You know, your
now I want a MISC version of the Starliner.
Yeah.
That in my head looks so cool. We don't have anything that mirrors Carillion art style. So I just kind of gravitate more toward MISC as kind of the fill-in for them, but we really need a Carillion type. That kind of like lots of flat edges kind of thing. I guess Anvil somewhat? Anvil kind of gets there.
It just it has the flat edges, but not as much the shape language.
Yeah, very much.
Outside of the edges, like, you know,
Like we're starting to see some of it with the lib. The liberator does have like a lot of the round bits and all the flat edges. So I'd like to see that language expanded. Because the liberator does not look like it's in the same family of the Carrick at all.
No.
So hopefully we'll see more along the military utilitarian that the liberator has, and less the military high nose or highbrow with the Carrick. Yee. All right. I think that's everything I had, and I do need to at least wrap up pretty soon here. I need to be.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to ask you if that's all your notes for engineering gameplay, because I got to crash too.
Perfect timing.
Yep. Just want to say thanks to everyone in chat and who watched and hung out with us. We will be back probably early next week to do the monthly reports. And it reminds me, I need to PM Sergeant Tickles again, because I'm trying to get him and Night Cobb on Sunday to do Armchair Admirals and Generals. I'll let you guys know.
Nice.
But yeah, we'll keep you posted on that stuff. I should have this episode up on Friday on YouTube. So if you missed part of it and you don't want to watch the VOD on Twitch, I don't like watching VODs on Twitch. I prefer to just watch the YouTube. You can check it out there with timestamps and everything, and it'll be broken up as it usually is, and uploaded in separate videos as well if you just want to watch the one section or the other. But yeah, that's all we have for this evening. Hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Again, if you are interested in these different videos and the clips and the quotes, all the links and everything will be in the show notes in the description on YouTube. So if you want to check them out later, you can reference that. The other thing that I included that we didn't go over, just because it's very time consuming and not all that interesting, is I went through the monthly reports going back to like January of last year, and found and clipped everything about the resource network, resource management system from all the different teams and the work that's been going on, just to give good proper context of all the work that they've been doing. And that's just in the last year and a half. So if you want to check that out, you can see what monthly reports they've been mentioned in and what work has been done, just to have a better understanding of where they are in terms of that progress. But yeah, so thanks again for your time, everybody, and we will see you in the next episode. Naz, if you want to take us out.
All right. And I didn't get to any outro bits, but
oh yes.
If anyone's looking for, no, it's fine. If anyone's looking for an org, since this is going to be posted on YouTube anyway, I might as well plug it again. It's Noah Forge Industries on the site, on the, what's it called, RSI site. But you can also just ping me and I can get you guys an invite. Lots of fun RP, but we also do a lot of nice work. We actually bought our AP specialist, asset protection, Scorpius, and we're about to buy our mining lead, a mole.
It's because the mule is not going to be very helpful.
yeah. And then possibly after that, I'm looking to pick up more C2s in game. So this is all in-game work we've been doing, because C2s are really powerful right now. Anyway, that is all we got for tonight. Thank you so much for coming. As always, everyone, be kind. Bye, everyone.
Good night.